Welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast. My name is Sara Vicente Barreto and I'm your host. I'm a corporate strategist, problem solver, social entrepreneur, writer, mom of two, and passionate for growth, at home, in business, or in my community. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I hope you enjoy our conversation today. If you're a regular, make sure you hit the subscribe button and do drop us a review. I would be so grateful. This is season 1 of the Make Space for Growth podcast, Finding Growth in a Crisis. In this season, I have asked amazing women leaders around the world to join me in a fireside chat about how they have dealt with lockdown and the COVID-19 crisis. We will spend some time learning about their business and how they have coped or not with it. Quarantine, lockdown, shelter in place, or whatever it may have been called in your country. For me, this has been an inspiring time. I find crisis can create excellent opportunities for cleansing, decluttering, and finding new avenues. At home and in our business, crisis can make space for growth. Join me for this journey to find out how, because it is time for hope and light. After Milan, London, Lisbon, San Francisco, and Singapore, it is time to go back to the US, this time New York, or actually North California for now, but only temporarily. For episode 6, I have Emily Rasmussen. Emily is the founder and CEO of Grapevine, a group giving platform that helps groups of friends, families, alumni, and more to create giving circles. Giving circles is where they pool their donations and decide together where to give. Grapevine has already moved $1.5 million to nonprofits in 2020 alone, by growing month-on-month donations at 67% since they launched in March. They are the exclusive platform partner of Philanthropy Together, the Gates-founded National Giving Circle initiative, and are backed by top early-stage investors. Previously, Emily was the founding executive director at NYU Center for Ballet and the Arts, launched the Lincoln Center at the Movies Global Media Initiative, and developed innovative financing models for impact at Enterprise Solutions to Poverty. Emily has consulted on event cinema for Disney Theatrical Group, taught creative and cultural entrepreneurship at Sony Purchase, and spent 2 years developing microfinance and fair trade programs in India. Emily is a member of the LISC Emerging Leaders Council, holds a BA from Occidental College in Diplomacy, World Affairs and Economics, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. This will be our first episode covering a social business, and I know you'll be curious to see how they have done with the crisis. Let's dive into it. Emily, welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast, and thank you for accepting my invitation today.
Thank you, Sarah. Happy to be here.
Emily, before we go and talk business, may I ask you, what was your favorite thing to do as a child, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I think as a kid, I always loved reading a lot, but then I became enamored by ballet, which is not unusual, I think, for a lot of kids or a lot of little girls anyway. And I started dancing ballet, and that became the thing that I wanted to be when I grew up.
You did have a stint associated with it. So do you still dance?
I do, yeah. So I was fortunate. I did continue to pursue that for quite a while, and then was able to dance professionally for a bit with Pacific Northwest Ballet. And then I left that for a number of reasons, but I still dance. I still take class, or I did anyway. It's a little different now with COVID, but I was dancing on occasion when I was still in New York, and we did things like that.
That's very cool. I have spoken briefly about what you do in the intro, but could you give us a quick background on your business and how you've come about to create it?
So Grapevine is a group giving platform. We help groups of friends, families, alumni, and more to pool their donations and decide together where to give the combined amount.
How does it work? If I have a group of friends, what would I have to do?
Sure. So you'd come together, you'd start a giving circle on Grapevine, which would create a kind of community space for you to invite your friends to. You would all pool your donations into a charitable fund in this community space that you'd set up. And then you'd be able to nominate nonprofits pulling from our database and other recommendations on the platform for your group to consider. Ultimately, you would get to discuss and read the information on these nonprofits or hear the nonprofits pitch, and then you'd vote and you'd decide where to send your pooled funds. And by doing that together, you're able to move a much larger amount as a group, right? So instead of giving maybe a $500 or even $5,000 donation, through giving circles, people on average are moving $100,000 as a group per year. So really, making a much bigger impact that they can see and feel in a more tangible way than they can necessarily on their own. And also being able to come together in community with these other people to help identify organizations, do that vetting, and just feel more confident in their giving. So this is a model that's actually been a bit of a grassroots movement here in the US. It started in the early 80s. It's called a giving circle. And so Grapevine is working to make giving circles easier and more accessible to everyone by bringing them online.
I'm going to spend the podcast saying it's awesome. I need to control myself because I'm biased. I run a charity. So I'm like, yes, this is amazing. But I'll try and not look too excited. So Emily, this is the first social business we have on the podcast. You've explained a little bit of how people can get together. Can you explain a bit maybe who your customers are and how they interact with you? Because maybe the audience will benefit from that a bit.
Our customers, I like to think of them as what we call everyday philanthropists. So these aren't the ultra high net worth philanthropists, right, who have had a whole philanthropic industry built up around them. These are donors that are more in the kind of mass affluent and even mass market economic buckets. This philanthropic industry hasn't really been tailored to their needs, and that's where this model is really able to make a big difference. In addition to that, we've seen that giving circles generally have been largely driven by women. So about 70% of giving circles are women led, and the membership is women. And so it's been a really interesting model driven by that community. But as this model has continued to grow, it's more than tripled in the last 10 years, we're starting to see a much broader range of donors adopting this model. So a much broader range of age groups, economic brackets, backgrounds, and identities that are adopting this model for their own purposes and finding it a useful way to come together in community to make a difference for the things they care about.
Thank you. And so people understand, can you talk about the business model and how is Grapevine sustainable?
Yeah, we have a very scalable business model that's been used and is being used by a lot of major fintech companies. We accept tips at donation checkout. So it's optional for the donor to decide how much to leave us as a tip when they check out. And that is the core of our revenue. So it really scales with the amount of donations that we move and also the value that we provide to our users.
Great. And one more question before we talk about the recent crisis and how it all developed. What size of team are you today and where are you located in the world between the team?
Yeah, that's actually a more complicated question than you would think, given the current situation. So we are a team of 6, and we were, before COVID, already located across 2 coasts, on the East Coast in New York City, and then on the West Coast in the Bay Area. We now are a little bit further afield, so we're obviously working remotely. Some of us are still in New York, some still in the Bay Area. We also have some people outside of that, Seattle, Argentina. So we're a bit spread out, but we're all together every day in our virtual stand-ups and Slack groups, etc.
So you got us started already, and let's talk about the last 6 months in a bit more detail. COVID-19 is still not let go of us, and so let's go first through the business, and then maybe we talk a little bit about how this changed your personal life as well. Can you first tell us what happens in the business when you entered lockdown, and what measures did you have to take, especially with your team and employees? You already said that part of them were located, but can you give me a little bit of a rundown of lockdown? What happened?
Yeah, it was an interesting time, obviously, for everyone. We all started working remotely, and we were fortunate there in that we already had some virtual stand-up plans that we were doing already because of our team being remote and then having Slack. So we just started using those things, I would say, much more often to stay in touch. We also just ended up being, I would say, thrown into a very busy period. So while we were trying to grapple with this change in how we were working and our own lives on a daily basis, Grapevine itself started to experience significant growth very quickly. And we saw that coming for a number of reasons, but a couple of primary ones being that with COVID, there was a lot of social need and people were looking at ways to give back and help. And so that, in addition to the giving circles we were supporting, no longer able to meet in person, and needing more support with virtual ways to engage and come together, we found ourselves just overwhelmed with the amount of work that was coming our way, but also we felt very compelled to do everything that we could, because not only was this a way for us to support these groups, but it was also a way for us to help them support their communities that were in so much need. So all of that was happening, and I would say the one other thing that happened, which I think probably happened for a lot of groups, is that we were talking to a number of investors at that time. We were looking to raise some more funding, and all of those conversations, everything just kind of stalled at that time. Everyone was just sitting on the sidelines and waiting to see, as we all were, what was going to happen. So that was the other big change for us, and really forced us to focus on reducing our spend and really working toward achieving profitability as soon as possible, so we weren't dependent upon those investor conversations.
So Emily, you said something there that we haven't spoken about before in the podcast. I'm gonna slot a question in there, which is, what are virtual stand-ups? Because I think it will be beneficial for some of the people that are listening, and they haven't worked remotely before as you've done. What's the benefit? What do you do?
Yeah, so every day we have the same time every day, and we all log in to our it's a Google Hangout. Actually, it's not a Zoom call. And so we're all there on video. The idea is that you're supposed to be standing up. So when you are standing up, then you are incentivized to keep the meeting very short. So this is not supposed to be some, long drawn out meeting, but more of a quick touch base in the morning and go around the group. What are you doing today? What's on your list to do? And it's just a way for us to stay up to date with what people are doing, and also to have that bit of face time together. Admittedly, I don't think any of us stand up for our stand-ups anymore, but but we do them every day, and they've been really helpful.
You keep the name. I think that's great, because we did start the a bit of daily meetings at the charity as well, because everyone was remote, but we didn't think of calling them virtual stand-ups. I might relabel them to make sure they're shorter. So Emily, you got us started already, and I found that amazing in terms of the numbers you quoted for me during this time. This was a moment where a lot of people were going through difficult situations, and you actually could observe firsthand that people stood up to people in need and to very difficult situations. Can you expand a bit more what you saw, obviously in your revenue, but also in the way that people came and wanted to build these giving circles?
Yeah, for us, the growth has been exciting as a platform, right? So we've really been able to not only help groups, but also that has been driving growth and adoption of our tools. So in this year, in 2020 thus far, we're just shy of hitting $1.5 million moved to nonprofit. So very excited about that. And we've accomplished that by growing our month-over-month donations by nearly 70%. For the past 6 months. It's all really exciting, and keep in mind we launched Giving Circles on Grapevine in March of this year. So this has all come all at the same time, right, with our big launch and all of this growth. In addition to that, as far as the revenue goes, we do see on average 5% tips on the platform. So as we've been continuing to grow those donations, that's obviously been very helpful for our own revenue, and hitting that operational sustainability that I mentioned was a goal earlier. Yeah, and then as far as what we're seeing with giving circles, I think there are a few things. One is that existing giving circles who had that offline way of connecting and meeting, without that, we've been able to, we've just seen the need for a lot of those groups to have virtual solutions. And so where there may have been some friction or just a kind of slower conversion process to get those groups onto the platform, COVID has actually made it so that those groups are, I think, much more open to, to technology and open to change at this moment in order to keep going. And so we've seen quite a spike in new active giving circles joining the platform. And then in addition to that, I think the other thing that we're really excited about is we've seen larger number of just brand new giving circles. So those groups that weren't already in a giving circle together in an offline capacity, but are just a group of friends or a family or an alumni group or some other group that decided in this moment that they wanted to come together and give back and create a bigger difference as a collective. And so that's been really exciting because we've done all of this growth and everything that I mentioned with no marketing spend. This has really been about reaching out to these existing giving circles and seeing how we can support them and get them onto the platform. And so now to start to see these other groups just finding us, however it is that they're finding us and starting to set up groups is wonderful, because we've always known that the next phase for us is to really grow the overall giving circle market and help new giving circles get started on the platform.
That's great. And we've been hearing a lot on the podcast of a common theme we've had was that customers were closer than ever. And they were home, they had time to spare, and they desperately wanted to be in touch with the brands that matter to them. I know you were a new brand, but at the same time, you were an existing concept that people had. Has this been the case? How do you feel that, you probably had a business plan pre-COVID that you didn't count on this specific factor? Has this been the case? Do you feel like people got much closer and the relationships with you were different from what you expected?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for us, what started to happen is there was less of us reaching out and making the case for what we were providing, and a lot more of us still reaching out, but asking, how are you doing? How are you thinking about engaging your group at this time? What are the challenges that you're running into? How can we help? We really just felt it was important for us to do that to keep this work going and to figure out, how we could be of use at this time. And one of the interesting things that came out of that is what we found is a lot of these groups were wanting to move their online or offline gatherings into the online space. But many of them were not comfortable with Zoom or familiar with how to do that. And so even though we had never done that before, we just started doing it and said, well, we can help you with that. We're happy to jump in. We'll help you plan that, and we'll help you organize it, and we'll even be on that call with you and host it on our Zoom account. So we upgraded our Zoom account, and that has now become one of the primary things that we do for a lot of these groups, and a great way for us to build trust with them and show them that we're really there to support them in whatever they need, and ultimately, get them to understand the overall value that we're bringing as a company to the space.
So you created a whole new set of services that customers couldn't get otherwise. I mean, how long did it take you to adapt to this?
I feel like it was just a constant process, and it was not a well thought out, we're going to do this now. It was we're talking to them and that's what they needed. So we said, sure, we'll do that. When do you want to do that? And we developed it together. And over time, we've now become the virtual giving circle event experts, right? So people come to us and we host webinars with the major national giving circle networks on how to do a virtual giving circle event and different ideas and tips and tricks and how we can help, just because we leaned into that need when that was what everyone was most concerned about. And now it's become a core part of what we provide these groups.
And Emily, in previous episodes, our focus has been mostly COVID-19, as it's a pretty big crisis on its own, but we have to talk about BLM as well. There have been some very dramatic events going on, some signs of change, not really as many as we would hope, but you did mention to me that this was an area where your customers took a keen interest, and you've seen that as well. Can you talk a bit more about it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think our Giving Circle members, they're all donors. They're all active in their communities. A lot of these giving circles, keep in mind, are people that are coming together traditionally in person and wanting to make a difference for the communities in which they live. Yeah, a lot of these groups were very much affected. I would say all of them were very much affected by the BLM protests and by the spotlight on the racial inequities that really shone, and feeling like they wanted to do more, even though many of them were already doing things, right, whether it was through their giving circles or otherwise. And so I think what was really nice to see is that this community of giving circles really came together, and there were a number of conversations and webinars and groups that were talking through these issues and how they could help and what they could do as a collective and individually, et cetera. So there was definitely a lot of attention to the moment and to the issue, and continues to be. There are working groups that have been set up over the past several months that are continuing throughout, the coming months and year, so that this doesn't become something that came and went, right? But is really something that continues to be part of the conversation and how they can make a difference. Oh yeah, and just one last thing I'll say in addition to that conversation and just learning and understanding that is obviously critical for any kind of thoughtful response. They've also tried to be quick with a response in terms of funding, right? So a lot of these groups are operating on a scheduled cycle. So they might be doing grant making every quarter or every year. And what we were able to support them with is putting together rapid response funds that enabled them to pool their donations outside of their normal grant making cycle, and even crowdfund in additional donations from non-members, people outside of their groups, to support organizations that were participating in this dialogue and in the work that was happening, so that they can move money more quickly.
Emily, I know there were a lot of businesses struggling out there, but there's also quite a few entrepreneurs that were looking for optimism, and you've just given me quite a few examples of optimism. Prices are tough, but they're a huge opportunity for cleansing and a bit of change. So can you talk a bit about the new areas that you see in your business that maybe weren't there before when you were thinking about it 6 months ago?
I think we're always learning what the opportunities are. And so from this, I think for us, it's given us more of a comprehensive view of the kind of challenges that giving circles are facing and the ways that we can support them. So aside from saying, hey, we're a platform for you to manage your payments and your community engagement online, now we're a much broader technology infrastructure partner that can also support you with your Zoom calls and can help you think through that next event. So for us, just thinking a bit more broadly about our Giving Circle leaders and what their challenges are and how we can support them, whether it's something we're directly providing or whether it's a way in which we can kind of broker relationships with others that will help them meet those needs. Those are a couple of the ways that our view has expanded. And then just thinking about, as we're doing all of that, right, and just being open to stepping into those opportunities, then thinking about, okay, how do we make this sustainable, and does this go beyond our current business model? Is there, for example, a premium version of Grapevine services that we can make available to some of these groups that want more support around a number of different things? And so we're currently exploring some of those things as well.
And in terms of work practices, everyone around the world is trying to figure out this reality of working remotely or mixed teams. Can you maybe share some of the lessons that you take from your own team, things that you've adopted and that you think you'll keep in the future, or the other way around, things that you used to have as a practice and you're like, why did we even do that before?
Slack, we will be using a lot more, as we were never very good at Slack, I would say, and now I think we're getting better. So I feel like that's here to stay. I think also just having more flexibility, right? Letting people kind of do their thing, and their work doesn't always have to fit through the 9 to 6 time period in the office, which we were never quite that way, but I think even more so now we're more flexible with our hours and when people need to take time. So I think that's really appreciated. We've had conversations about that with the team, and we'll certainly be continuing that. And then I think the other thing is just, at this time, everyone has put a lot more attention on how to stay connected. And I think for us, that is something that when you're a startup and you're small and you're always just moving quickly, we did not always pay that much attention to some of these smaller things and celebrations of things and recognizing people's accomplishments, because just as you do one thing, you're moving on to the next. And I think this has really been a great moment for us to take a step back and think about those things and trying to find more ways to build that in a virtual way. And so whether we'll continue to do it virtually or not, I think just making sure we're always carving out that time to do those things and celebrate and thank the team and recognize those accomplishments is something we'll certainly take forward.
Yeah, you're reminding me of our previous guest, Priti, in Singapore. She said, you know what, keeping sane, I opened a champagne bottle each time I sold a couple of books. I just went celebrating the small wins one by one. And it's, I think it has taught us a lot about enjoying the smaller things that and connecting at that level that maybe we didn't think through before. So Emily, you've launched Grapevine, you had this huge growth, you adjusted your practices, created new services for your clients, and developed these new relationships. But as if that wasn't enough, you've decided to get yourself into something even very challenging, which is equity crowdfunding. And for those that are not familiar with it, can you talk a bit more about it, what it entails, and why of all times did you decide to do that now?
Sure. Yeah, equity crowdfunding is just a great way for startups to raise money from their communities and broader communities of people who are excited about the work that they're doing and want to invest in that future and be part of the upside, right, of that future. And so with equity crowdfunding, you don't have to be an accredited investor. You can invest in a startup and be part of that journey and be part of that upside at as little as $100. And so for us, the reason that we decided to do this is, well, there are a few reasons, really. I think, for us, COVID created more social need, as we talked about, and really amplified and enhanced the demand for our support. And so we would like to be able to lean into that even more. And so if we could grow our growth in our engineering teams, we know that we could continue to grow more rapidly and support these groups even more than we already are. That's one. For us, the use of funds would actually really be helpful for us to continue that growth and even accelerate it. The second one is we applied to and were accepted in the top 1% of the 2,500 startups that applied to this XX Fund WeFunder Fellowship for startups that are fighting Cobit. And so as part of that program, we were in a 3-month fellowship program with them. We had an incredible mentor, the co-founder of Human Interest and YC alum, and a number of other great YC alumni who are part of and founded this community. And so part of that program was they invested in us and then also supported us to launch this crowdfunding campaign to raise some additional funds from their broader communities too. So that seemed like a great opportunity and a great way to learn about and do this with their support. And then the last thing is just we are a community-based platform, right? So that is what we do. That is who we support, all of these donors, and we support them to support their communities. And so it just felt very fitting that we were also a community-supported company through this kind of investment model.
So Emily, you talked a bit about your use of funds, and assuming this crisis stays on for some foreseeable months, where do you see the opportunities for the business to grow and to stay and be healthy?
Yeah, I think for me, the opportunity to continue to grow and stay healthy is continuing on along the path that we are already on, right, which is continuing to just engage more giving circles and get more giving circles onto the platform, continuing to help them as they're also trying to navigate from moving from strictly virtual to a combo virtual, online and offline experience. And then, of course, expanding all of that to actually do more awareness raising and marketing of the Giving Circle model and of Grapevine broadly so that we can help launch whole new giving circles and have a much broader community, I would say, of online first giving circles that started with Grapevine from day one.
So one final point on the business. Knowing what you know today, would you give yourself different advice if you'd go back 6 months? What learning do you feel like you had?
6 months. So much has happened in such a short period of time. It's incredible. I think one piece of advice would just be to take a deep breath and try and surround yourself with people who can help you see the forest through the trees, at different moments. It's been a little bit of the drinking from the fire hose kind of situation. And I think at times that can be just really overwhelming. And it was really important for me to find, to connect with people who could help clarify where we were in the broader scheme of things and make us feel like, we're on the right path, but no, everything feels very out of control and crazy right now. We're navigating it well, and people who, helped us navigate it well. So I guess that would be my advice to myself, to find that sooner than I did and seek that out. But I was fortunate along the way to have some great people who played that role for us and for me in particular.
So Emily, if you don't mind, let's move into your home a bit. And you mentioned to me that you did have a bit of a life change and you decided to move back home during this shelter in place period. Can we talk a bit about that?
Sure. Well, so I was in New York City, which was not the best place to be in mid-March of this year, late March of this year. Yes, I decided my family's out on the West Coast near Lake Tahoe, California, so in the middle of the mountains, and I just decided that it made sense for me to leave the city and be there with family. And I would say my mother was a big factor in that making sense to me. She was pretty adamant that was the right thing to do. So I thought, okay, I'll move out there for 3 weeks. They're very convincing, those mothers. So yeah, I thought I would move out there for 3 weeks. I'd do 2 weeks of quarantine, spend a week with the family, and then be back in New York. And here we are 5 months later, and I'm still on the West Coast. So mom was right, as per usual.
They typically are, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the family experience during shelter in place? What went well, and what maybe didn't go that well?
Sure. I think I was very fortunate in that I moved into a space that I had my own space. So I had my own room, I had my own office, and so all of that went really well. I had my own space within my family space, and I was able to make use of that and still get my own time, my personal time, and also the time that I needed for work. I think the other thing that went well was I started doing some more cooking with mom, which was nice. And so that was just a nice way to still build in that connection time to bond and do all of that amidst all the craziness of everything else. I don't know, I'm trying to think of what didn't go so well.
Okay, you can say it was perfect.
I guess, yeah, I mean, if I had to say anything, it was just that I think my mom now is going to be a bit disappointed when I move out. So well, maybe that part is still coming.
So working remotely is not for everyone, and especially a new environment with new family commitments. And can you share a bit more how you managed to stay productive through these times?
I think I was very fortunate, to be honest. I don't have children, so I didn't have to worry about that. I'm not married. I don't have a partner that I had to that was very demanding in any way. So I was fortunate that I could, as my work really expanded, I could just focus on that, and with relatively little guilt or other trade-off other than, again, my family being there, and so was trying to see them a bit as well. But yeah, I think it was pretty, for better or worse, right? I mean, I actually was talking to my team the other day, and they were telling me, I think you need to take a vacation because it's been a lot, and we just haven't had much time to take a breath and get a little bit of a break. So I haven't had too many trade-offs in that regard during this time.
So Emily, mental health is something that's very close to my heart, and something I always try and bring to light in the podcast. This has been a tough time for people's mental health, whether they were living on their own or whether they were with family. Can you share any tips of how you managed yourself or advice that you may have on managing your mental health through these times? Sure.
Yeah. One thing that I always do is I journal in the morning, and I find that to be a really helpful way for me to just get grounded a bit before I start the day and get pulled into craziness, and also just gives me an outlet for whatever else might be, on my mind or bubbling up. That would be one tip that I would share. I've been doing that long before COVID, but I find that to be very helpful, and found that to be helpful during this time, especially. And then I think it's just finding that quiet moment also, right, to reflect and take a minute to set some intentions for the day. So I always try to include that as well. I think that would be the biggest thing. The second thing for me, though, and I mentioned this earlier, but one nice kind of newer thing that came out of this time was carving out more time to do dinner in the evening with my mom in particular, and cooking together, and just taking up that bit of time making dinner, doing the dishes, and doing something else aside from work and connecting with someone. So I found that to be a really nice thing, even if it was just half an hour or 45 minutes in the evening to take a bit of a break and do that. And then the last thing actually I would say is that being up at Tahoe, I was very fortunate to have such a beautiful space. So I would try to get out, and even just a quick walk around the block. One thing that I started doing, I remember a couple of other people previously, I noticed when I would set up meetings with them, often they would do walking meetings. And some of them even did running meetings, which I tried once and it did not work. So I don't know that I'd recommend that, but I admire those who can do that. But yeah, just a walking meeting. I have enough trouble trying to breathe while I run. So
There's no talking involved.
Right. That's how I am too. So, but just, picking up the phone and going for a walk, and having that next meeting, that next call while you're out getting some air, if you can't just take the time to go for a walk, quietly. I found that to be a nice way to help moderate.
Thank you. So, Emily, if you could just pick one, what was the biggest challenge COVID has brought you?
The biggest challenge COVID has brought, it feels like at different moments throughout the last 5 months that has changed. And so I think in the beginning, it was very different from what it is now. But given where I am now, I think the biggest challenge is just the unknown of everything. And it's hard with a company not being able to plan ahead. It's hard for your personal life and your family life and all of that to not be able to make plans. I would say that's been the biggest challenge across the board, and just constantly trying to figure out how to navigate that the best way we can, realizing there's not much we can do, but just go with it. So.
Yeah. We all had things we liked, and we all had things we didn't like about shelter in place. But this is a podcast about growth. And so you spoke a little bit about the cooking, you spoke a little bit about your walking meetings. Did you find that the other opportunities that in being stuck at home with the family, and I use ear marks when I say stuck, because it can be a very good thing. And did you start anything else new yourself or the family that you want to share?
I think being at home and being in just generally a more quiet state of existence, right? You have more time for connections that aren't big. It's not going out to a dinner. It's not doing some big thing together, but it's just having a quiet moment and having a conversation and being able to appreciate those moments. And I feel like, especially coming from New York City, which is always go, 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 and there's always some new thing and another event, and you've got 4 events in an evening and you're running from one to the next. You can feel sometimes like all of those things that even you do for your personal life, your social life, your personal health, whatever it is, almost all just become another checkbox, that you need to check off the list. And I feel like this time has helped get away from that. Just an opportunity to rediscover some of the benefits of just the quiet moments and the smaller things that we sometimes overlook or forget.
Yeah, I think this was the only time where I didn't feel like time was flying. Time was actually just going by, and you build some appreciation of that. Emily, I got a surprise round for you because I want to end this on a light note. So you can just shoot the first answer that comes to mind. There's no judgment. What was your shelter-in-place favorite book?
This one I know, Angle of Repose. My mother is a librarian, so when I flew out, she had a stack of books waiting for me to choose from. So this is why I loved reading when I was growing up, because my mother was always picking amazing books. And so Wallace Stegner, it's a masterwork of his, and it's just an incredible story, but also very fitting because it's this woman who grew up in the New York City area and then goes out west with her husband. It was just kind of a fun journey out west to read while I was amidst my own journey out west.
And what was your favorite sport?
I guess hiking. I don't know, do we call that a sport?
It counts. Anything that gets you moving is a sport. Okay. And lockdown technology.
Zoom.
Lockdown greatest lesson.
The value of connection and just touching base with people, no matter how small.
And if you had one word to describe lockdown, what would that be? A lot of guests have cheated and used 2 or 3, by the way.
Oh, really? Okay, well, tumultuous comes to mind, but then I feel like I don't know if I want that to be the one. Tumultuous, I don't know, educational, inspiring, challenging. There are a few.
I think those will work. Emily, Thank you so much for being part of the Make Space for Growth podcast. It was a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I loved hearing about how Emily launched Grapevine in the middle of this environment and achieved astonishing growth, helping charities raise over $1.5 million this year alone. She also was quick to adjust her business model to service Giving Circle leaders who were keen to move their events online but needed help. I really enjoyed finding out about how she moved back home and time slowed down as she was out of the go, go, go New York environment. Connect with me and tell me what your biggest takeaways were. As I said, this is our very first season, so your support would be great. Please rate us, leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. You can read more at makespaceforgrowth.com and join our community to access our free Facebook group, Make Space for Growth. Please share your thoughts and questions on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and I will add a link to the show notes. Don't forget to go visit Grapevine and find out more about giving circles. And if you want a piece of the action, they're also crowdfunding. It has been a pleasure to bring this fireside chat to you today. I am grateful you are there. I get to do this.